What would happen if a gacha game story actually respected its audience? Every time I make a video critiquing the flaws in gacha storytelling, someone will come into the comments and tell me that I need to play Reverse 1999. It has a reputation for being intelligent and creative, for unique world building, depth, narrative complexity, and fantastic presentation. But at the same time, its critics felt it was cryptic and confusing, the kind of story where complexity is assumed to be equivalent to quality, and the actual experience of the narrative is flawed as a result. It was high up my list of games to try, but at my current pace, that meant I'd probably get to it sometime in 2030. So when Bluepoch reached out to ask if I'd be interested in playing the game and sharing my experience with their upcoming collaboration with Assassin's Creed, I was very excited to try it for myself. I downloaded it straight away and played a bunch over the following couple of weeks before the collab dropped, and then some more since then. I think I understand both sides of the debate. Let's talk about it. My most immediate first impression when opening up the game was that it's absolutely beautiful. The art style has a painterly aesthetic with richly detailed backdrops, gorgeous animated cutscenes, and an eclectic cast of characters. The character designs are fantastic, and they're far more diverse than you might expect. There are of course loads of beautifully realized human characters, but they're also very confident in breaking expectations. The phrase human characters might make you assume there would be elves, dwarves, or perhaps aliens or robots or other sci-fi things, but that's not the direction they took. Instead, they've included tons of characters who are truly bizarre, including a sentient apple, a UFO, and Sputnik of all things. This outlandish diversity makes the world feel even more unique and made me curious what the heck was going on. The story is presented in a visual novel style with live 2D animations. This is my first experience with this style of storytelling, and it's much more engaging than I'd have expected. The game's menus are a joy to look at too, though as a new player I found the amount of information being thrown at me a little disorienting at first. The layout and the icons all felt unfamiliar, so in the first few days I struggled to find my way to even the most basic things like my inventory. But that's kinda par for the course for gacha games, and it only takes a little while to power through the confusion before you get used to it. As someone with a preference for beautiful games, Reverse 1999's aesthetics really hit the spot. The sound design is solid too, with music which evokes each era and matches the atmosphere of the narrative, and sound effects that paint a picture of what's happening in the story and make the experience far more immersive. The voice acting is pretty great overall as well. There were some rough edges at first, with some characters whose effect was a little flat, but even the ones who stood out the most improved over the course of the first couple of chapters, and the quality quickly caught up. I particularly loved the accents. Each character matches the era and region that they're from, which does a fantastic job of conveying a sense of place in such a nuanced way. It's refreshing to not only have variety, but to also have consistency within each region, and for the voices themselves to contribute to the world building. The story began in the middle of the action, and I love that the MC is an established character with her own personality and history, rather than the almost blank slate semi-self-inserts we see so often. This does come with a caveat, however. The MC is one of the characters who knows the most about what the heck is going on, there is no narrator or framing story, and there are no characters who need certain world-building aspects to be explained to them. And since there's no narrative reason for anyone to explain anything, they just flat out don't, and it can be a little hard to grasp the context at first, but more about that in a minute. It's also clear very early on that the story does take a more mature approach, including obscenities and character deaths, which is another welcome change of pace for me. The opening also throws you straight into the combat too, and while the system was very unfamiliar to me, it's impressively intuitive. I quickly got the hang of the basics, and right from the start it was clear it had the potential to become much more intricate and interesting in the long run. All in all, a solid start, though the sheer volume of intrusive questions which kept jumping to my mind left me a little less immersed in the story than I had expected. The only persistent frustration for me was a major flaw in the Steam Deck support. While the game runs smoothly for the most part, the cutscenes sadly do not function, and instead you get a glaring error screen for the duration. I did also play a little on PC, and the cutscenes ran perfectly there, and they presumably would on mobile too, but this game feels so perfect for Steam Deck, so I hope they can figure the cutscenes out at some point. Before we get to the story, let's quickly cover the combat and progression systems, though since there are deep dives on these elsewhere and I'm very much new to the game, I'll keep this high level. The combat is a turn-based strategic card game. On each turn, you can perform one action per character on your team. Most of the time, you have 3 characters, so that's 3 actions per turn. An action can be used to play one of the cards in your hand, each of which causes a character to perform one of the usual combat skills like attacks, buffs, debuffs, healing, and so on. But you can also use an action to move your cards around. When 2 identical cards are placed next to each other, they combine into a more powerful version of that skill, so this can be key to winning battles. This card merging mechanic opens up some fun strategic layers through the use of tuning skills, which let you do things like draw new cards, shuffle, discard, and so on. There's also a system called Moxie, which ensures each character gets their ultimate once they've used a certain number of actions. Elemental strengths and weaknesses can be used to multiply your damage, and of course each character has their own unique mechanics, so team building and synergy are also important to the strategy. I feel like I've barely touched the surface so far, but it strikes a great balance between being intuitive and complex, and it's been a lot of fun. And of course, Reverse 1999 also has multiple different progression systems. There's character leveling, where you consume EXP items to gain levels and boost your character stats, insight levels, which unlock passive abilities and essentially raise the character level cap, skill upgrades, which strengthen the effects of your character's skills, duplicate copies of the character to upgrade their star rarity and raise their stats, side cubes, an equipment system which boosts your character's stats, and later on you also unlock a system called Resonance. I'm too early on in the game to really speak to how all of that fits together, but so far it looks like it could add some interesting nuances to the combat. And similarly, I've only had a few encounters with the gacha system so far. There are no weapons, but instead there are many different character rarity levels, and there are already well over 100 characters. I'm curious to know how generous the game's rewards are, how free-to-play friendly the content is, how the gacha system feels in the long run, what the endgame is like, and so on. But the reason so many people recommended Reverse 1999 to me was that people who get into it absolutely love the story and praise the storytelling to high heavens. Since I'm always looking for gripping narratives and care a lot about storytelling, they really wanted me to give it a try. And since I love time travel, science fantasy, and historical fiction or period dramas, the premise is something which was always going to appeal to me. In the year 1999, a supernatural phenomenon called a time storm began wreaking havoc. These storms make time run backwards, and anyone caught in their vicinity disappears completely. You play as Vertin, a timekeeper who is uniquely immune to this, and instead their power lets them travel through time through the storms. The story takes you to an eclectic variety of historical places and cultures, and in each area you meet countless interesting characters as you investigate the storm and trying to find a way to prevent its effects, specifically its ability to reverse time and to erase normal people from the world. It also leans into the tried and tested trope of having a special class of people who can wield magic, called arcanists here, who are divided amongst themselves between factions who feel their power should grant them the right to rule over the world, and the ones who believe their abilities bestow the responsibility to help others instead. Since the setup is right up my alley, you might think I'd have loved it from the very first moment. However, the learning curve proved a little problematic, and this is where that wide divide in opinions likely comes from. I don't think I've encountered a learning curve so steep in a video game story before, but I have in books, fantasy especially, and in that sphere it's something which gets talked about a lot. It's one of the first decisions an author has to make, and all the different paths are acknowledged and respected as different types of storytelling, each with their own audience. To show you what I mean, let's talk about 3 different series, each of which has a vastly different learning curve. First, the Old Kingdom trilogy by Garth Nix. While the majority of this series deals with magic, necromancy, world-shaping powers, and long-lost mysteries, it starts in a very familiar environment, a posh boarding school in a quiet and leafy countryside, in a land where there is no magic at all. It introduces the fantastical elements one by one, and gives you the time to get to grips with each concept in isolation before it moves on to the next building block. This gives the books a shallow learning curve, and it's very easy to get to grips with both the story and the world building. Second, the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This series has an epic scope and is set in a world completely alien to our own. A harsh landscape dominated by devastating high storms, hurricanes which sweep the world at regular intervals and shape the cultures that survive and thrive in such a hostile place down to the tiniest of details. Once you get past the extensive prologues and into the main story, the actual sequence of events is fairly easy to follow, but there are countless details which are left for you to figure out on your own. Much of the world is a mystery at first, and part of the fun of reading this series for the first time is to figure out what the heck is even being described to you as you slowly put together an understanding of how the world works. And third, Malazan, Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. This series explains absolutely nothing to you, and the experience of starting the first book feels more like you're thrown in halfway through the 6th book in a 10-book series. The world has tons of depth, but the narrative itself is even more confusing to the uninitiated. It isn't so much a learning curve as a learning cliff, and you're expected to put in a ton of work and pay a lot of attention to everything for a long time before anything even starts to make sense. It has a large and dedicated fan base, but at the same time, there are many who try to get into it but find it to be utterly confusing in the end. The most important thing to note is that it is not a positive or a negative, it's simply a tool that writers can make use of. Which of these approaches works for you is a matter of personal preference. Some people prefer the ease of getting into something with a shallower learning curve, especially if it builds to something epic later on. Others like being thrown into the deep end and left to fend for themselves in a world which feels vast and overwhelming, and the struggle to piece together the answers is their favourite part. Many will like either, or maybe their preferences will depend on their mood or the genre at play, or many other factors. Often a blend of different learning curves applied to different aspects works the best, especially in games, since that way you feel like you have at least some part where you're competent even when you're still floundering elsewhere. Personally, I love the approaches taken in the Old Kingdom and Stormlight Archive and anything in between, but the learning cliff of Malazan was a painful experience, and I have never got further than a few chapters into the first book before giving up and moving on to something better suited for me. I'd argue that Reverse 1999's approach sits somewhere between Stormlight and Malazan. It throws a lot at you very quickly, with little explanation across lore, narrative, and characterization, anything from those big important questions that drive the story to the less important ones which I somehow need answers to even more. The time-traveling storm and the Arcanists and their conflicts are interesting, but why is there a sentient apple? How does that work? Why do all the other characters act like this is totally normal? At times, these intrusive thoughts distracted me from the story. Games rarely have the confidence to provide a truly steep learning curve. They'll often shoehorn in discussions or explanations, even when the characters involved would never realistically say those things. This tendency can kill immersion and is tolerated much less in literature. To anyone who enjoys the self-driven discovery and investigation inherent in that type of storytelling, this approach will feel utterly compelling. To those who would prefer something less steep, they bounce off the story early on and struggle to understand why anyone else would like it. For me, Reverse 1999 was maybe just too far towards the steep end for me to really get immersed at first. Too many questions, not enough answers. It's particularly interesting to have this problem in a story where the protagonist knows everything. I like that the characters don't speak out of character just to move things along, but I did find myself wishing for more answers. I kept going because of those recommendations from people who felt I'd love it, because the consensus seemed to be that the story quickly begins to pick up steam once you reach chapter 3, and because I do love that feeling once everything starts to click together. However, the game's storytelling won my trust before I actually got there. When a writer wants to tell a story with a steeper learning curve, they need to earn your trust that the effort will be worth it. The best way for them to do that is to show you that they can tell a satisfying story. One option is to tell a smaller and more compact tale within the bounds of the larger narrative. This option fits really well with the structure of live service games. It could be a more focused chapter of the main story with its own satisfying emotional arc, but it could also be through a story added as part of an event. Enter the Assassin's Creed collaboration. I never had the chance to play the earlier Assassin's Creed games and have only played bits and pieces of the more recent ones, so while I know the rough idea, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Though, of course, the premise of the series did seem like a natural fit for the world of Reverse 1999. The first part of the collaboration story is set in Renaissance-era Florence, and it does a brilliant job of blending the narratives of the two universes. It caught my interest very early on. You meet Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, and together you unravel mysterious secrets hidden in the work of a famous painter. It really reminded me of the Da Vinci Code with some added assassin spice thrown in. I'm also confident the famous painter whose paintings you investigate was based on Piero della Francesca, and I recognize that reference thanks to both the Da Vinci Code and to Downton Abbey of all things. Even though I'm neither an avid history or art nerd, the subtle references in the storyline and the dialogue were super fun to spot, and the story led up to a sweet and heartfelt ending which paid off the emotional promises from the start. Even though I started a little bit before midnight with the intent of playing just the first section, it had me so locked in that I ended up playing the entire quest in a single 4-hour sitting. I won't go into tons of detail about the plot since I highly recommend you experience it for yourself, but suffice to say that it's not only piqued my interest in finally finding the time to play Assassin's Creed, but Reverse 1999 storytelling proved they know what they're doing and earned my trust that the payoff to what they're building in their main story will be worth the climb. There's another half of the collaboration still to come, this time set in ancient Greece, and I'm excited to experience it. Overall, this is a great example of a crossover between two games done right. The lore of both games dovetails nicely, and it's clear that everyone involved put a lot of craftsmanship and care into making sure everything remained authentic to both sides of the source material, while weaving both universes together into a seamless and compelling shared story. The character designs are very recognizable, but are stylized to fit within the world, and from what I can tell, they've also done a great job of designing their combat abilities to express their origins as well. It's really cool that they have their own unique mechanics which make them stand out, and which sound like they'll add extra nuance to the existing strategy in the game. My experience with collabs in other games had led me to be skeptical, but this one was a joy to experience. Reverse 1999 sets itself apart through its unflinching determination to provide a deep and nuanced world and story which puts the onus on the player to figure how it fits together. The climb up the learning curve itself is something many people enjoy, though it does unfortunately turn some others away. I can appreciate it, but tend to need something which makes me trust the writers before I can really get going and enjoy the view. And thankfully, the Assassin's Creed collaboration provided exactly that, a gripping story with intriguing puzzles and fun characters which showcased all the positives of the game. I will continue playing, and I'm excited to see how things progress now that I'm at the start of the chapters where people tend to say the story really starts to shine. If you're interested in trying out the game, now's the perfect time, because there are a whole host of new and returning player rewards to get you started. I've included a link in the description if you want to give it a go. It doesn't take long to progress enough for your characters to be strong enough to finish the event, and maybe, if you give it a chance, you'll have just as much fun as I did. Until next time!